Hey, what is up everyone? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be building a full stack application from scratch. We'll be using some of the most popular technologies to build a simple and scalable application that you can extend as you wish. Our backend will be built using ExpressJS and PostgreSQL. ExpressJS is a popular web framework for Node.js used to quickly build robust APIs, while PostgreSQL is a powerful open source relational database management system that can handle large amount of data. In the backend folder, we will have our ExpressJS server running that will be connected to our PostgreSQL database. We have our PostgreSQL database running using Docker and Docker Compose. We will also be utilizing ChatGTP to help us write our SQL queries for our API. We'll be using Next.js and Material UI to build the front end. Next.js is a powerful and versatile framework for building React applications. And Material UI is a component library that provides pre-built UI elements for you to easily build beautiful user interfaces. I will be showing you a little bit of Next.js and Material UI. We will be using some Next.js features and using the API we built in the previous section. We will be doing some form validation using Formic and Yup. And I'll show you how to use this to write good forms in your front end. By the end of this video, you will have a solid understanding of how to build full stack applications using these technologies. So let's dive in and get started. So first, let's go ahead and take a look at the project that we will be building. So we have these two folders, our backend and front end, and our terminal open in VS Code. So let's navigate into the backend folder so we can start up our backend application. And for this, I'm going to be opening another terminal. So I have two open terminals. I'm going to navigate both of them into the backend directory. Okay, so now we can see that both of them are in the backend directory. I'm going to give them different names. So the first terminal we're going to use to start up our Docker database. So I'm going to say this is the DB. And then we have the next terminal and we'll use this for the API, the Express API. So let's get the Docker PostgreSQL running. So we can say Docker Compose, because if we do ls, we can see this Docker Compose YAML file in the backend. So this allows us to run the Docker Compose up command, and this will start up our database. So we can see we have a Postgres database running, and now we can go ahead and run our API. So I'm using yarn, so we can just say yarn start, which would get our application running. So we can see we connected to the database, and that is all good. The next part we want to get running is our front end. So let's open a new terminal and cd into the front end directory. And here we're using Next.js, so we can use the yarn dev command to start up our front end. So now that we have our front end, our back end, and our database running, we should be able to access this application. So let's head on over to the browser. Let's open up on port localhost 3001, and this should launch our Next.js React application. And here we can see a very basic looking type of social media thingy. It's pretty much just logging posts. So it's doing the basic CRUD operations on posts, but we can see we're using Material UI to get a nice quick looking UI up and running. And during the rest of the courses, we'll definitely cover more Material UI because it's a great component library. So we can navigate to different pages. We have the About page and the Home page. We can delete posts. It would pop up, are you sure? And then we can delete it. We can see it's being deleted. We can also edit a post, so we can say update, and we can update it. We can see the post updated. and we can create a new one. Let's say new post body, and we can create it, and then we can see the new post. So we can go ahead and delete all the posts, and this will pretty much clear out in the database as well. So this is the front end that is talking to the back end directly. So once we get to the bottom of this, we can see the application then displays there's no posts. And if I do a refresh, we should actually see that there is no posts in the database. So in the backend, we can see that all of the API requests were logged with Morgan. So we'll be able to see this during development. And yeah, that is it for the application that we're going to build. There's a lot going to be involved. We're going to learn some Docker. We're going to learn some SQL front end. And yeah, just working with fun technologies. So let's get going. So let's get started on the backend. Let's first create a project file. YouTube full stack project. I don't think we have this directory yet. So let's create it, make dir. Then we cd into YouTube full stack project. Okay, let's open a Visual Studio Code. Okay, so in here, we're going to create two directories. So make dir, the backend and the front end. For now, we're only going to be working in the backend. Okay, so navigating into the backend folder, we're then going to initiate a Node project by running yarn init -y. Then we can start installing some of the dependencies, which will be Express. We can say no, yarn add, Express, Morgan, our logger, .env package that allows us to use environment variables. Then we have the course package, which will allow us to do cross-domain talking. And then we have our database connection package for PG, for the PostgreSQL. Okay, so with this dependencies installed, we can continue. Once this is done, we'll install nodemon, which will help us to run our project with hot reloading. Okay, so we can yarn add with the -dev flag nodemon to our project. So basically we're just installing some of the dependencies. I would really suggest taking a look at the names of the dependencies that was installed and pulling up their documentation, pulling up ChatGTP and asking and finding out more about this. So let's first create an index.js file for our server. And from here, everything will be launched. So in the package JSON, we can see the following. We have our dependencies and our dev dependency. Now we need a script to run our application. So we'll use the start script, and we're going to use nodemon to run our API. Okay, so this is all we need. Now we can start building out our Express backend. I like to use the module, ES6 module import syntax. So I'm just going to use the type equals module for the package JSON in order to use the module syntax with Node.js. So let's import Express. So this is just setting up a very basic Express API. And then we can create an app server. And this app can listen on the following port. It's on port 3000. And then we'll just log some output. Console log, server running. Okay. Let's create one endpoint just to do the health check. So we can have an endpoint on the server with the app get. And then we add a basic endpoint just on the root route. And we have the request and response from Express. Okay, and on the response, we're just going to say API is running. Okay, so here we have a very basic Express server running. So let's actually test it out by in the backend directory. Let's run yarn start. And we should see the nodemon log and we should see server is running. So if we were to go to the port 3000, so let's open our Thunder client API over here, our API client. And here we can just say to localhost 3000 / a get request, and then we can see the response is 200 OK with the API is running. So now we've got our basic Express set up and running. let's start adding in some meat to this project. Okay, so let's get the environment variables set up for this API project. So what I like to do is I like to create a new folder called config, and inside of the config folder I create a keys.js file. In the keys.js file we will extract all of the environment variables and keys from this object. So it would look as follows. So we'll have an object called keys, and it will contain a variable or a field key value pair called port with the specific port number. But the port number and any other environment variables will be called from a .env file. So let's first say process.env.port, and we can give it a default in the keys file. So let's say if it's not provided, we can fall back to 8080. So this is an example of one key in our project. So instead of calling the port directly like this, we can import from the configs the keys folder and .js, and then here we can import the keys object and then use the keys.port. So this is how we would do it, but we first need to export this. So we can say export keys, and now it should show the port as autocomplete. So we can see the port. Now as we get more variables, you'll see this becoming useful. So it's good to set this up from the beginning. In order to pull this process.env variables into this file, we would need to use that .env package we installed at the start. So let's quickly do that, import.env, and then it's very easy. We just say .env and we call the config. Let's just rename this .env, and then we have the config, and the config just pretty much takes the path to this file and it allows it to be populated in this fashion. So now if we save this and we go back, let's actually take a look on what port it is running. So let's output the strings differently, running on port, and then we can add the keys.port. Now we will be able to see it's running on port 8080 because it's taking the fallback value and not the value from this env. So we need to create an env file in our root directory of the backend project. So let's create the .env file, and in here I'm going to create a new variable called port, and I'm going to run this API on port 3001. So let's save that, and if we take a refresh now, we'll see that it's now no longer on 8080 but on port 3001. So now we have set up the environment variables to load correctly, and I'm going to be adding in a few more environment variables for our database. So the next part we're going to actually start looking at and working on is setting up our Docker Postgres database. Okay, so in order to set up a Postgres database in our application, we are going to be using Docker. Docker is a very useful containerization software that's just very important in today's industry to learn. So I would highly suggest taking a look at it. I have a few courses on it and I will link it in the description or in the tags above. But let's get started. So the first things first, let's stop our API, and we're going to need to create a new file called docker compose.yaml. So I'm sure that you have your Docker things set up on your computer already. So this won't work if you don't have Docker installed and set up. So go ahead and do that before you continue. So we're going to use a little bit of ChatGTP. So let's head on over to ChatGTP, and we're going to ask, please provide me with a Docker compose file to run a Postgres database, just like this. Let's see what it gives. It even goes ahead and explains the file in a very nice and detailed way, and we can go ahead and read everything up there. But then we can pretty much just take this code and copy it from here and paste it into our code base. Okay, so let's go ahead and paste that in here. And we can see it gives us a nice Docker Compose YAML file with all of the commands and flags that we need. So we can see the service is called DB. It's pulling the Docker Postgres image. We have the restart always. We have some important environment variables we need to provide. And then we're creating a volume. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a named volume. So I'm just going to create volumes here and call it DB Postgres, just like this. And instead of it just being a dynamic one like that, we're going to say DB Postgres in this fashion. So now, if we were to run, we could actually go back to ChatGTP and we take a look at what the command we should run. We can see to start the database, simply run docker compose up with the -d flag, which pretty much just means it's going to build it from source, this image. So let's go ahead and do that. So from here, we save this file and we open up the terminal. And in the backend directory where this docker compose file lives, we can then run docker compose up with the -d flag to ensure that it will create a build. So we are in detached mode. So now if we run docker ps, we can see this Postgres image is running. So let's quickly stop this, docker compose down, and we can see that it's down. And let's run it in non-detached mode. So we can do the build flag so that it builds this image from scratch. But I already have Postgres image installed, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to run the up command, and it would go ahead and create a backend DB1 process for this Docker Compose file. So now we have a Postgres database listening on this port. So it's mapping its internal container port outwards to the local computer's port. So this is all Docker related syntax. I would suggest diving a little bit deeper into it, as I'm not going to explain it in this video. But this is how we can get up an easy database. We have volumes connected to it, so if it's switched off and back on, it persists the data, and we have the ports mapped. So we can do this for pretty much any database. So this is the nice thing about using and learning Docker, is if we want a MongoDB database, we simply add the MongoDB image and what necessary environment variables for that setup. So now we're using Postgres and we have that setup. So let's take a look. We can see the Postgres database directly appears. So this is just the output showing that the PostgreSQL database has started and is running, ready to accept any connections. So next part, we're going to start setting up the connection string. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with the connection. So what I like to do is in the config folder, let's create a database.js file. And in here, we're going to do our connection. So first, let's import the PG package. So PG from PG. And we want to extract from this PG object, we want to get the client constructor. And to this client, we want to create a new client. So let's export a constant called client, and let's export it as a new client. And to this client, we then pass in a few objects. The important one is the connection string, and this would be a formatted string as follows. We're going to have the Postgres, and then we're going to have our DB user as an environment variable. So we need the DB user string placed in there, and then we're going to need the DB password placed in here, and an @ symbol, and then we can place the host, the DB host. Oops, I need to look at what I'm typing. And then in here we can place in the DB host, and then we need the DB port _port with a slash and then the DB name. So all of these will be keys that we're going to add in here now. So this could actually be prefixed with keys as follow, and we'll go ahead and add in all of these keys in just a sec. Okay, just like this, we should probably then import the keys as well. So we can say import from the keys.js file. It's important to add the .js because we're not using parcel or webpack. So we need to add that there, and then we can import the keys. So now we actually need to go and create all of these keys. So we can say we have the db, and this would be process.env.postgres user, and then we can have db password, then we can have the db host env.postgres host, and the db port process.env.postgres, and the last one is the db name. So db name will be process.env.postgres db name. Okay, just like this. So now we need to actually add these environment variables to our env file. We'll give them values in just a second. Okay, so now we can save this, we can save this one, and we can save this one. Okay, so now we have our Postgres environment variables over here. We can actually pull them in the Docker Compose file in a different manner. Instead of adding it directly like this, we can load it from an env file as follows. So let's actually go ahead and ask ChatGTP to customize this for us so that we can import it directly from this file. Adjust YAML file to import env variables from the ./.env. So it's giving us the same output. So here we can actually just add it in like this. We don't even need to add in this information anymore. So I'm not actually sure why it did it this way and this way, but you only need to point to an env file in this manner. So let's get that set up. So here I just quickly asked ChatGTP to correct itself, and it corrected itself here. So we can see we can only use this env_ file. So let's go ahead and add that to our project. So from here in the Docker Compose, let's actually remove this part and add in like this. Okay. And we're going to need to add in a user here. So let's just call it example user, example password, and then the host will be localhost, the port will be 5432, and the DB name will just be example_DB. So if we save all of this information, we should be able to pull it in to the Docker file, no problem. And then the keys should contain all of the correct information over here. And then we can import the keys and set up the connection like this. So let's actually test if this connection is going to work by importing this client that we're exporting here into the main file of the API. So let's import from the database folder, config database.js. We want to import the client. And then here where we're running the server, let's make this an async. And we have a try catch. And first we log that we're running the server. And then we want to do an await of the client.connect. And if we are successful with the connection, we want a console log here, and it should just say database connected. And then we can say console log and log out the error if there is any. So let's go back. Let's see. Let's actually rerun our Docker container to see if the information is being pulled in correctly. Docker compose down. And now we can say Docker compose up. Let's pull it up. Let's see if it's working. Okay, database is ready to accept connections. That's all good. Let's create a new terminal. Open up a new terminal. Okay, so let's cd into the backend folder as well. And here we can say yarn start. Okay, we get an error log, password authentication failed for example user. So let's go take a look at why this is the case. The env gets loaded, the database key, user password, and let's see if we name it example password. I think we need to rebuild this database or delete its volume. So in order for us to fix this, we're gonna stop this Docker running and we're gonna have to delete its volume created initially, as we created the volume with different credentials. We switched the env credentials a bit now, so let's just close this down, and then we're going to run docker volume rm, and I believe this volume, let's take a look at the volumes. We want to delete this one, so let's copy that name, and we're going to say docker volume rm and then the volume name, and we have dropped that volume. So now we can rerun our docker file with the new credentials. So we can just say docker compose up. We don't need the build, but let's just say build. Okay, now we will see it initializing with the new ones. Here we can see it does a lot of new initializations, and now we can run the yarn start, and we should see server running and database is connected. So this is a good step in the right direction. The next part we want to start doing is creating some basic tables in the database and then working with the table entries via routes and controllers. So let's get that going next. Okay, so next we need to create routes in our API. So I'm just going to create them dirty in this file right here, and then I'm going to do refactoring in just a second. So we want to go get posts, and it should have a function, request and response, and this will probably be some asynchronous function. Okay, and in here we're going to have a try catch where we'll just console log the error. Okay, and then here we will do some API call where we get all posts query, and then add it to the client. So we'll say client.query, and we'll get all post query like this. Okay, so we want to then respond, so we can res.send the data as response.rows. The count should be equal response.row count, just like this. Okay, so that's for getting all the posts. Then we want to get a post by ID. So let's say post by ID. And here we're going to need the post ID. And we'll get this from the request params ID, which we named it up here. Okay. And then we'll get post by ID query, which will be some query which we'll create in just a second, and this query will be passed along here, so we can say right over here, but we're gonna not provide it as parameters like that, but as to key values like this in an object. Okay. And then we can add in the values, because this query, which we're going to create as a string ultimately, is going to need the input of this post ID to complete the query, because this will be a where select query based on the post ID. So we can add the values as an object, as an array, and add in as follow. And I'll show you in the query, we just reference as $1, $2, depending on the position in the array. It's starting at 1. Okay, so here we then get back a single query. So PG, the package that provides this client with the query, it gives us this rows, and this rows is an array of type any. And if this array is empty, then it means we did not find the post that we were looking for. So in this case, we want to return a different type of status or a different type of message. We want an error that says not found, and a status code that matches not found for a for. So we want to say if the response dot rows row count is equal to 0, then we want to do this type of return, else we return with the first index. And the row count would obviously just be 1, but we just keep the returns consistent. Okay, so this is for getting these posts. So now we're going to need one for app post when we create a post. So it's app post put command to edit a post, and then we're going to need one for the delete command. So instead of continuing in this file, you can see it's going to become very big, especially if I don't close it like this. It's going to become a lot of code. So let's start structuring this better. So let's create in here, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to make a new directory in the backend folder called routes and controllers. Okay. And inside of the routes, I want to create a post postroutes.js file. Okay, so let's go ahead and create that. Let's open up the post routes file, and here I want to import Express once again, because I'm going to start using the Express router, because I'm creating like a routing file. I'm separating my routes into organized folders and files, and in order to do this, you use the Express router to break up this app into different routables. So yeah, anyway, let's continue. We can say router equals express.router, and we want to export default router. Okay, and on this router we can have multiple different routes. So we can have a route of /posts, and this will be a get. There will actually be two types of gets. There will be the first get will be on this only /posts, and the second get will be on the ID. Okay. So on this we'll have the post as well, and on this one we'll have the put and the delete. Okay, so this is a quick way of doing this, and it's pretty organized for basic, CRUD operations. You can start adding middleware in here in front of this as well, but we're just keeping it basic. So we're going to have a get all posts function from the controllers, and we're going to create post function. We're going to get post by ID, and we're going to have a update post by ID and a delete post by ID. So these are all just functions that we'll create in just a second, and they're pretty much called your controllers, so they will be in here. So let's go ahead and create that. In here we can create a new file, and we can call this post controller base. And here we just pretty much group the functions or export the functions for this post controllers. Okay, so export const, or let's export an async function, get all posts, create post, post by ID, update post by ID, and then delete post by ID. Now, you should be able to import them all. Just like this. Yeah. Okay, so now we've connected the controllers to the routes very quickly. In order to actually use these routes within the main app over here, the main file, we're going to do something different. We're gonna create a middleware. So we're gonna say app.use. And anything that's on the /post route, base route, we want it to go through the post routes. And import this. And now it should route to this. There for all the posts. Which means we can remove posts from here, just like this. Okay, so that was a very quick setup. So if that was too quick, go through it again, slow it down. But okay, let's start refactoring this into the controllers. So this would actually be the get all posts function there, and it would get the request and response. Actually remove that then, take this one as well, paste it into this one, and same request and response. Okay, so let's actually go ahead and finish up the rest of these controllers. Let's quickly finish them up. And then we'll get these SQL queries from ChatGTP. So I'm going to describe to ChatGTP exactly how my model for my post would look. And then it should write me SQL queries for PostgreSQL. Okay, so let's continue with these controllers. So in order to create, we're going to have a try catch again. I'm going to just console log the error. Okay, and for the create, we're going to need the request and response. From the request body, we will get the actual information for this post. So we can say post body equals request.body. And then from there, we can create, so let's say create post query string. This will for now just be an empty string. Create spell checker, thank you. Okay, and then we feed this to the client query. Client query, create post query, just like that. I actually do need to import the client in this file as well. So import from config db.js client. Go. Okay, so now we get the response when we do the create. And with that response, what I usually do with SQL queries, I ask to get that same response back. So I would then get the response in the response.rows. And it's always an array, so just take the first value. So it will look like this. So you can say the response body will just return after the create. So we'll return data, response.rows, and the first value again. Count, response.row count. So we don't really need to add this here because we always know it's going to be 1, but it's like just making the return APIs consistent. That's always important when writing APIs. Okay, cool. So this should be all. Okay, we need to feed this in once again as text as part of this object for the configuration, and then the values will be the body. So from the post body we'll pull the title, and from the post body we'll pull the body. So these are the two fields that we need to send to this API in the body of the post request in order for this API to work. So this is very important, these two names. But okay, so then we should be fine with this query, and the response should return, and then we know it's successful. Okay, cool. The next one, get a post by ID. This one's already done. So let's get on to the update. So once again, request response. We're going to have a try catch in here with a console log of error. And then we're going to get a few things. We're going to get a post ID because we want to update by ID. So from the params ID. And then we're going to get the post body, or the put body in this case. Put body from the request.body field. And then here we kind of do the same thing. We get update post by ID query. This is probably a redundant name, but make it clear. And then we pass it to the response, or we get a response from the client.query. We pass an object with text, which would be that update query, and then the values would be as follows. We'll first provide the ID, so let's say post ID, and then we'll provide the put body title and the put body. So in here we need to always return both the title and the body when we do an update. So even if we have to take the old title and then just place it in again, we need to add both. Then this update query will once again return us the newly updated value. So in the response, we'll be able to know if the response.row count is equal to 0. Then it means we did not actually find this post to update. So we get a 404 again, where we just return an error saying not found. Okay, else we'll have our response with the data, response.rows, and taking the first value, and then just having the count as row count. Whoops. Okay, now this should just be formatted correctly, and we need a comma. There we go. So this was the update one, also pretty quickly. Okay, and then we can do the delete one, which is the last one. Request response, try catch, console.log, error, And then here we're going to kind of do the same thing. So I'm going to copy this over here and paste it in here, but this will be renamed to be the delete post by ID query. We're not going to get any from the body. We're just getting a post ID, so we don't need to provide any other values here, and then the rest should be the same. Okay, let me just double check this. Cool. So all these APIs should be done now. The only thing that's not going to work is the actual queries, because we are just adding empty strings. So let's actually go ahead and create these queries. For this, I'm going to create a new file in the backend, a folder called SQL. And in here, I'm going to be adding in all these queries. So the way I would read in the file will be with the fs command. So I'll import the fs module, not command, and then I'll say fs read file sync, and then I'll provide the path to the file from the root directory of this project. So it's in the SQL /, and then we'll just call this the same as the variable, and it will have the file extension .sql, and we'll just call this to string afterwards, so it will read the contents simply of this file and then change it to string, and then this string will then be used in here. And this file reads are very quick, so this should be fine. I think for more performant APIs, you'd probably move this outside of the function. But this is really quick, the read-write with Node. Okay, so this is done. Now we can kind of fill in this type of situation for all the other APIs. You just need to rename the file like this. Last one. Okay, so now we can go ahead and actually go and create these queries using ChatGTP, which is actually kind of nice, and a little tip if you haven't been using ChatGTP for that reason. So let's go do that next. Okay, so let's use ChatGTP to help us with our SQL. So write me a SQL query to insert or create a table called post with two fields, the title and body. Okay, so here is how we can create a table called post. And this is how we can insert into. So now it's giving us a little bit more than we asked for, but thank you anyway. So now I want to create a table called post, but I want to only create this table if it doesn't exist already. Only code, please. And adjust query to only create table if no table post exists. Okay, so we just add the if not exist posts to the query. So this is pretty neat. So then we just take this one and we can go to our project. Here we can create a new file. I've just created some of the other files. They're still empty, but let's create a file here. Create table query. SQL, and then we just paste that query in here. Now it's formatted according to SQL. You can even run it in a few other cool tools. But yeah, this is just a nice way of working with SQL directly. And you can go pretty complex with ChatGTP if you start using your words correctly to map joins and stuff. You can get pretty nice queries out of it. Okay, so here we have the create query. Now let's go and do the rest. For creating a post, for getting all posts, because now it knows how this post table looks like, right? We can also say the post table should contain ID and created and updated dates. Then it goes ahead and just customizes the query for you. So now, the only thing we need to do in order to change this is just copy this back to our app, go into the create tables and paste this in there. So now it's going to use that one instead of the old one. Okay, so create post, let's go. Insert into, here we get the creation of a post, so we can copy this. So, and paste that SQL query in here, but instead of us specifying the values like this, we are going to specify it with the insert notation. So PG, the package that we use, will then interpret this SQL string and then place the connecting values in there. So we need to make sure that we pass in title and body as title 1 and body 2. So let's go and make sure we do that. When we create a post, we add the values as title and body. Here we have title and body. Cool. So let's go ahead and use ChatGTP. Give me all the SQL queries to perform CRUD on the post table. So let's see what it gives us. Sure, here you go. Okay, and it gives us the SQL query, that one we've got. Okay, we've got the read, so here we can get all, so get all of the rows. So we can copy that one, copy the code, go to get all posts query, just add that in there. Let's go back. This is to update a query, so we can copy this, update the query by ID. So we can say update post, set the title, and here we can just add in once again. I think I'm starting this one with 2. At the body is number 3. ID is number 1. So now it's just substituting the values in there. So this is pretty neat. I'm just gonna space this like this. I like it more readable that way. Insert into posts and then the values. Whoops. Okay. Cool. And then the one is delete, so we can copy delete here and add in the delete. Post where, and ID should just be substituted. Here we have all our queries: creating, create the table, delete, get all, get post by ID, so we don't have this one yet, and we have the update, so we need the get post by ID. So this is also pretty simple. It's this one right here. Select all from posts where ID is equal as follows. Cool, now we have these SQL queries written up and their parameters are added. So now this should actually work. We are creating the table. So we haven't created the table in the database yet, so we still need to do this. And we'll do this in the initialization over here. So we'll run this query. And we want to run a few queries here. We want to create the table. If it doesn't exist, create table. And then we want to delete all the old ones, all the old posts, just for development purpose. We want to delete all posts. So let's delete all the posts function. And then we want to insert dummy post. Okay, so this is what we want to do during this initialization phase. And in order to do this, we're once again just going to run a few queries so we can actually ask ChatGTP once again to delete all posts. We can create the SQL query. So how to delete all SQL query, SQL to delete all posts from table. Okay, and because it's keeping reference of what we're talking about, it's taking the schema we described at the top and then just giving us answers. Okay, so we can create a new one, delete all posts, query, SQL, like that. So dummy posts. So let's ask ChatGTP to generate dummy posts for us. SQL to load post table with 10 dummy posts. Just like that. And it's going to give us 10 dummy posts. We're going to copy this code and use it to sync our database. Cool, copy that code. And we can just call it insert, or let's say create dummy posts query.sql. Paste that in here, and now we can just call these queries. So we're going to use that same fs file strategy. So import fs from fs. And then we want create table query as a string. So fs.read file sync SQL / create table, create table query.sql .toString. Okay, so now we pretty much do this for both of these queries, just spacing in the strings, and we're going to change this to delete all posts query. Hopefully I'm naming them correctly. And then we have create dummy posts query. Okay, now we just need to call them. So we say await, we use the client.query to actually create the table. Then we go ahead and do this with all the other. Okay, so let's check if this has worked. Let's check our errors. Express is not defined. Let's quickly navigate there. Oh, we removed Express. Import Express from Express. Okay, there everything is running fine. Did it create anything? Didn't see any of these queries running. But let's take a look at the API. So it should have synced. So if we go to our Thunder client, I've set up a few routes already. So let's get all posts in a new tab. Let's run this, and we have an error. So on API 3001, there we can see the posts. Cool. So we see all the posts, all 10 posts were created, and they're loaded in the data array, and the count is 10. So we know our API routes are working and the data was synced. So now if I add my Morgan logger, I'll be able to see when I log to the API or when I do some things with the API. So I'm going to say app use as a middleware, and I'm going to add in Morgan, and I'm going to add the string dev. So now whenever we make calls to the API, so let's open in a new tab and run this again, we can see the output here from Morgan. Cool. So let's try it out with the rest of the endpoints. So this is the create endpoint. So this, once again, just update that and save. And we're going to create a new one called post3 with some lorem ipsum. And if we create it, we can see we have an issue because we cannot read property undefined of title. So when we do the create requests, we are sending a body. So when we do create, we're looking for the request body, but request body is not being parsed yet because we haven't added the middleware to do that. So we have to say app.use express.json. And just like that, now if we were to do the create, we can see everything is still there. And we do the create, we get back the count, but not the data. So something is wrong with our return. Let's quickly take a look at our return. What are we returning here? We are returning the response row and the index 0. So there's probably nothing in that index, and that's because our query does not contain the returning part. So what we need to do is go to create post query, and then when we add something, we want to return it as well. So we can say returning everything. Let's just say everything like this. And let's try it out again. Get all posts. There is a total of 11 posts. Let's create a new post. Let's send it. And there we can see we get back the data in that query. So this took some experimentation, playing around with ChatGTP as well, getting that queries to work. So yeah, so that endpoint works. Now if we want to get all posts again, we see we have 12, and we are getting the last created post first, and then here's the posts that we created at the end now, the newly created ones. So we actually want to switch around this order, so we can go ahead and tweak this queries with ChatGTP as well in order to load the queries in the right format. Okay, so let's try out the rest of the queries. We're going to get a post by ID, so let's open this one, fix that up, and then ID of 21. So let's try it out here, ID 21, and we get back that post. Let's get back our newly created one, 32. So we can say ID 32, and there we can see that post. We can update a post. Let's try that one out. We're going to update the 32 one to say updated to 5. And once again, we see the count, but we're not seeing the response data being returned. And this is the same idea with the query. So when we do update post, at the end, we need to say returning and everything as a star. And the same for the delete post. So returning all just like this. Okay, and if we try it now and we update it, we get back with the newly created body. So very nice, very quick. And let's try out the delete one just to make sure all of them are working. Let's delete 32. I didn't change the endpoint. Okay, we can see we deleted it because we got it as a response back. And if we try and delete it again, we get an error saying it was not found. And if we try and get that post, it's going to give the error as well. If we try and update it, it should give you that same error as well. And if we get all posts, we should still see that there are 11 posts or something. Yeah, 11 posts. Cool. So all of the endpoints are working, and the queries have been added. There's one query I just want to tweak, and that would be the order in which I get all of my queries. So when I get all queries, get all post queries, I want to sort this by, or order it by the creation date. So let's ask ChatGTP to help us out with that. Okay, so here we're back in ChatGTP, and I'm going to say SQL query to get all posts in posts sorted by created at date. Newest should come first. Let's see what it gives me. Select from, order by, created at, and descending order. So if we think about it, descending order, and then it explains everything here. Take that query, paste it in here. No, just like this. And we go ahead and test that out. Let's go get all queries, open it up, and we can see 21 is first. And we do it again, we can see it's sorted in order now. Okay, so if I would create a new one, let's create a new one, send it out there, it should be at the top. Here we can see it's at the top now. So that did the trick. So this is our API completed. Next up, we're going to do the front end using Next.js and Material UI. So stick around for that, and let's dive in.